Um, okay, so this is a story entitled Old Lizzie and the Black Spot. Lizzie represents wife number 2. She had a different name, but Lizzie worked good for the story. So, it's Old Lizzie and the Black Spot. The tips of the tweezers surrounded the little black spot, and I drew my fingers together until the tiny object was firmly held. Then I pulled. Nothing happened. The black spot clung tenaciously to the surface it was polluting. Lizzie, I don't think this is such a good idea. I don't care what you think. Pull harder, she snapped. But Lizzie, it really doesn't want to budge. I think we should leave it alone. Stop complaining and just pull it out, was her increasingly agitated reply. Lizzie was quite unpleasant when agitated, and my desire for domestic tranquility got the better of my good judgment, so I tightened my grip and gave it a good yank. For the briefest instance, it appeared the mission had been a success, for the ends of the tweezers held the remnants of the black spot and some appendages that grew out of it. But as I scrutinized the mystery object, my vision was suddenly blurred by a splash of red liquid on my glasses. I pulled back, removed my glasses, and then I realized what was happening. The black spot, which Lizzie thought was an aesthetic blemish in her ear, had turned out to be a small artery that had somehow popped out of its rightful place. Now, every time her heart beat, a small squirt of blood was expelled from her ear. I couldn't believe my eyes. The diameter of the bloodstream was very small, and the squirt lasted perhaps a quarter of a second. Half a second later, her ear squirted again. You could actually measure her pulse by counting squirts. I couldn't resist spending a few seconds relishing the scene. Lizzie certainly looked ridiculous standing there, fresh out of the shower in her bathrobe, with blood squirting out of her ear, and all because, once again, she had failed to heed the good counsel I offered her. The problem needed to be addressed, so I grabbed the washcloth and suggested that Lizzie hold it in place till the bleeding stopped. We expected it would clot in a minute or two. We were wrong. The washcloth, which was recently white, was now totally red, and the squirting gave no sign of abating. So we repeated the process, this time using a towel. The towel could hold more blood, and we were sure in a few more minutes Lizzie's ear would repair itself. But Lizzie's ear was deaf to our wishes and continued on its newfound mission of towel recoloration. The solution to the problem was beyond our capabilities. I needed to get her to the emergency room. But Lizzie wasn't about to go out of the house in her bathrobe, and getting dressed with one's head wrapped in a bloody towel was not a trivial undertaking, but it was amusing. Once Lizzie was dressed, we put on a new towel, and I drove her to the emergency room of the local hospital. Emergency rooms can get very busy, and this night was no exception. First, you have to see a triage nurse. This person's job is to determine how serious the condition is and place you on the waiting list. Of course, you have to answer a lot of questions, most of which have nothing to do with your problem. A line formed outside the triage nurse's office. Finally, Lizzie's turn came, and the triage nurse apparently placed her somewhere in the middle of the spectrum of necessity. The next stop was the business desk, where they took your insurance information, or tried to downgrade the seriousness of your problem if you had no medical insurance. We were told to go to a waiting room. If you ever need to visit an emergency room, be sure to bring a friend. I made several forays over to the various stations, inquiring about when a doctor might be able to see Lizzie. Finally, Lizzie's towel was saturated with blood, so I asked for a replacement. When they realized she had lost so much blood, she was immediately taken into the treatment area, given a fresh towel, and told that a doctor would see her shortly. I saw lots of doctors around the emergency room. Some were studying charts, others were talking. I believe 2 were flirting, and here and there a doctor and patient were together. I began to wonder how much blood Lizzie was losing and how long she could survive. The last thing I wanted was for her to perish from blood loss, though some thoughts I am not particularly proud of did flit across my mind. Shortly apparently had a different meaning to the folks at the emergency room than it had for me. Perhaps I thought it meant that a short doctor would be seeing her. I made several trips up to the big station in the middle of the emergency room, inquiring when Lizzie would be seen. Right away, just a minute, shortly were the stock answers I was receiving. Meanwhile, the new towel was turning a vivid shade of red. I felt totally helpless. It seemed there was nothing I could do to get a doctor to treat her. Lizzie was beginning to get worried herself. Then a brilliant idea occurred to me. I told Lizzie to remove the towel. She refused. I'm sure she didn't want to make a mess all over the room. Lizzie was, after all, always concerned about neatness. Just give me the damn towel, I demanded. Every so often, Lizzie responded to direct commands. I think it had to do with catching her by surprise and not giving her a chance to develop an objection. She handed me the towel. The ear was doing exactly what it had been doing when I first pulled the black spot out. I just stood there watching as squirt after squirt pumped out of her ear. Lizzie was upset, but I told her just to stay where she was, that I was taking control of the situation. Perhaps the trick to getting Lizzie to follow my suggestion was to have her ear pumping blood. Alas, I doubted I would be able to use that strategy again. After a minute or so, the walls and floor began to resemble a slaughterhouse. I quickly ran over to the station in the middle of the room and said, "Come quick, my wife is having a problem." A nurse came with me, and when she saw the scene, she ran back to our station, made a phone call, and less than a minute later, a doctor appeared. He explained that an artery had broken and that he would have to stitch it. The procedure didn't take long. 5 minutes later, Lizzie was back together. After that, I noticed Lizzie seemed to be a whole lot less concerned about her ears than she used to be. Unfortunately, she also didn't listen very well either.